Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis Vlog. In this episode, I want to share my experiences with psychedelics, meditation, and awakening. Let me start by saying this. I don't have a lot of experience with psychedelics. I'm not very knowledgeable about the topic, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. These are just my experiences and my conclusions. So I've tried DMT, and I recently had, with a very good friend of mine, an amazing experience with magic mushrooms. I have a lot of experience with meditation, so I thought I would share some thoughts about how I think meditation, awakening, and psychedelics may be related, and also how they might not be. So, here's something really interesting to me about psychedelics, and that is that you can meditate for a long time without necessarily much changing. Now, granted, some people have amazing transformations and insights the very first time they meditate. But there also are a lot of people who meditate for quite a bit of while and nothing really happens. For a lot of people, they're essentially just sitting there with their eyes closed, thinking, being lost in thought, and being constantly identified with the next thought. So nothing's really going on. However, if you do take psychedelics, something is going to happen. Like if you take DMT, your world is going to get rocked. So something's going to happen, and I think that for a lot of people who perhaps have a rough go at meditation, or maybe stuck in too much rumination and identification with thought, psychedelics can be, I think, for a lot of people, a very useful bridge or an opening where you can discover that, holy shit, very different perceptions are available. Like, I can have a very different experience of life, myself, other people, and the world. And it's mind-bogglingly fascinating that just a few grams of something can so unlock or so open the door to a completely different set of perceptions. So you're going to have some sort of experience, and that's going to show you that it's possible to have an experience of yourself and the world and of other people that's markedly different from the one that you currently have. So I think that's one way in which psychedelics can be extremely useful. Now, when I had my last experience, which was a very good one, there was an experience of everything just kind of being alive, everything pulsating, vibrating, and there just being this one energy field. So there was like a cascade of sensations, vibrations, and sounds, and no experience at all of being separate from it. So it was just this experience of just being life itself, and the whole thing being very vibrant and very much alive, right? So I mean, for most of us, that's a contrast from the experience of often being locked in the head, of like being in here, looking out at a world which is separate and seeing a multiplicity and diversity of seemingly separate objects. And this is largely language based or language created or thought created. Now, both of those perceptions have their use. It's just that if you can strongly experience one and then strongly experience the other, it can loosen uh, the identification with a particular way of experiencing yourself in the world as being reality with a capital R. So I think that can be very healthy and very useful. Um, for me, it seems as if you can really get that the experience you have is like a function of the virtual reality goggles that you're wearing, you can have wild experiences without that necessarily being threatening or coming across as dangerous. However, if you don't get that, the exact same experiences can probably seem very destabilizing. So it's probably a good idea to be pretty well sorted psychologically as an individual before you do it, and to have some experiences with meditation and observing experience. Now, I know there are a lot of people like Michael Pollan and others who report that people who have not been well sorted psychologically have had tremendous benefits by doing psychedelics. And I don't really know enough about the topics to have strong opinions about that. But one thing that strikes me is that in some ways, uh, the psychedelic stuff is kind of moving in the opposite direction of what I think is the purpose of meditation. For me, the purpose of meditation, or the bullseye, is the realization that there's no such thing as a volitional, stable, permanent self. Like there's no thinker in addition to the thoughts. There's no feeler in addition to the feelings. And psychedelics can help you have that perceptual shift. But what I think psychedelics can very easily do is that it can fixate on us, it can fixate us on experiences, wild, dramatic, perceptual, blissful experiences. And in my mind, that's kind of the opposite of what you're trying to do with meditation. You're trying to loosen the fixation with experience, with the content of experience, with thought, with feeling. Instead, you're helping people to discover what they fundamentally are before thought, behind thought, what remains whenever thought dissolves, the kind of stable, unchanging aspect of experience, to help them to discover that consciousness itself is peaceful, not lacking anything, and already free of any experience or thought that may be going on. So if you're not careful, psychedelics can increase the identification with experience, and then you may have a strong perceptual shift, but then the selfing process may come in and claim credit for it, and you may get notions that you are enlightened, or that you have special powers and stuff like that. And this is kind of the opposite direction of where a good meditation practice, in my opinion, should take you. There's also something else here that I think is extremely relevant, and that is that experience itself doesn't inherently mean anything. So I think that the experiences that I had on psychedelics and that my friend has, there's a lot of different interpretations that can be made out of the exact same experiences. And some of those interpretations may be very useful and empowering, and some of them may be very destructive. So one thing I have seen, for example, in guiding people with meditation and change work is that for some people, seeing that free will is a myth. It's not so much that, it's more that there's no I or self to really have it, right? But being able to see that free will is a myth, for some people that has been a incredibly empowering insight and realization. For others, it has plunged them into a deep depression. So it's not the fact of there being no such thing as free will in and of itself, but it's the interpretation of what that means. Or to discover the inherent emptiness of all phenomena, just how transitory all phenomena and experience is. You know, this can give rise to a sort of nihilism or a meaninglessness. But it can also be extremely empowering and liberating. So it all comes down to the interpretations, the frameworks that you have. And I see that a lot of people who haven't studied meaning making, who are not well sorted psychologically, for example, may very easily interpret dramatic experiences on psychedelics in ways that are very destabilizing and not necessarily useful. Also, remember that a person's stage of psychological development will also influence how they make sense out of either meditative insights or experiences on psychedelics. So you have a lot of you have people, for example, who may operate at early stages of meaning making, and they end up convinced that they're God, or why shouldn't they sexually grope someone because there's no one else, right? Like they're just making love with themselves, for example. Like people can there are examples of suicide bombers, for example, who have probably been in these sort of mystical states as they have done their deed. When it's failed, some of them have reported being profoundly at peace, profoundly happy, feeling that Allah, the voice of Allah just spoke through them, and convinced that the next time they would open their eyes that they would be in paradise. So like a oneness experience, but interpreted through a kind of mythic stage of development and a fundamentalist interpretation of a religion where martyrdom and jihad is one of the doctrines. So you're not necessarily unless the person has a relatively mature stage of psychological development, what they conclude from these experiences may not necessarily be that useful. You may have an enlightened Nazi, so to speak, which isn't that useful. So these are my reflections. Again, if you're one of those folks who have meditated quite a bit and nothing happens, psychedelics is probably a great way to open the door and to have you notice that very different perceptions are possible. And if you can view it as a set of VR glasses, um, it's probably useful. Um, Anyways, these are my thoughts on the topic. I'd be curious to hear about your experiences and your interpretations. Like you see people, for example, who have had experiences on psychedelics, and they make grand, sweeping, absolutistic statements about the cosmos and the universe and religion and these sorts of things. And I think these are, just as with meditation, studying states and experiences can teach you a lot about subjectivity and the workings of the mind and the nature of consciousness, but it's not necessarily going to tell you anything about anything else. So that's something to be very aware of. So anyways, wherever you find this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your interpretations. Uh, I'm doing a seminar March 19th and 20th titled No Self, No Problem, where I go into these topics a little bit. You can go to provocativehypnosis.com on the seminar page and take a look. Know that I see clients from all over the world online. So if you're curious about doing change work or mentoring, you can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. Thanks for listening.